So, Ari, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Mid-60s, 65, 66.
And when did you join the Air Force?
Well, I grew up with the gliders before that, and I made up my mind that I would be a fighter pilot for good. And 73, I got a chance to join the Air Force primary school.
So can you tell us some of the aircraft you trained on?
First of all, it was Saab Sapphire, the Air Force aircraft I flew with. And then the Fuga Magister jet trainer for the 70 hours worth before I went up to enlist. So that's pretty much it.
And what was the Magister like to fly?
Well, being a mechanical throughout the control system, it's very nice indeed. You have very little power available, so you have to be cautious with low speed, low altitude wise. But then again, you can actually feel everything the plane is doing by the feel of the controls, being mechanic. Very nice.
You also became an instructor on the type. Can you tell
Yes.
us how this happened?
Well, the system in the Air Force is such that all capable pilots, meaning almost everybody, is being trained to instructors. And I was supposed to be joining the Draken training, but instead they transported me to Kauhava Central Flying School to be an instructor. Luckily, in my point of view, is that I learned a lot being an instructor, and 2 years in Kauhava, and then I joined fighter squadron again. So I made up my mind I will never ever fly the Fuga again, because it's you know, it is hard to sit on there. It's like a church stool.
Wow.
You're sitting on the parachute combing, and it's not very soft in that way, and you're upright in there. So that means that it's your back is getting the punishment.
So then you went on to the Hawk. Can you tell us about this?
Well, it was exciting because they asked volunteers basically to have 4 weeks off home in southwest of Finland to be trained. And of course I was very keen, because it was one of the first groups to be trained, so why not?
So what was the Hawk like to fly?
Absolutely gorgeous. It's very sensitive. You see a lot of out there from the back seat. It is forgiving. You may have a whole wing stall and still be controllable with the ailerons throughout. And the noise level is lowish compared to Fuga. And further, you can actually almost land more nicely from the rear seat than from the front. You have the bow of the windshield in front of you from the front seat. But then again, you have clear view on top of the first pilot, and I enjoyed that. Very good aerobatic airplane.
Yes. But you became an instructor on the Hawk, and can you tell us about this?
Well, majority of the trained to be pilots were already experienced Fuga pilots. Even some of them were Draken pilots, so it was quite easy to train them. And we made some tests against the fighters with the Hawk, very much so that we beat the hell out of them with the turn ratio anyway. But most of the pilots liked the plane a lot.
So do you think the Hawk was the right aircraft as a training aircraft to go on to frontline squadrons?
Absolutely. It's so close to fighters that it doesn't make any sense to train first of all in a light aircraft and then sort of a middle aircraft and then Hawk and then to the fighter. You can join the light aircraft training and directly to the Hawk, which is quite short distance. So
how long did you spend on the Hawk, and did you enjoy it?
Well, I was an instructor for a couple of years because I was one of the first ones to have the Hawk neck. It comes with a price. on one flight as an instructor during a loop, I was turning my head and it stayed there. So I had to have a sick leave for that. And the doctor said that if you want to look aside as a 70-year-old, by all means quit now. I did, and it still aches every now and then. But it's a common thing with the Hawk pilots. So,
So how many hours did you get on the Hawk?
500-ish.
A lot then.
Yeah, something like that.
So how did you get assigned to the Draken?
That was a volunteer thing. You want to show your interest. Pretty much, there are a lot of pilots wanting to do that. And you have to be convincing that why am I just a pilot who is needed to be trained. So pretty much your interest will show the way. And as I told you before, I was assigned to an instructor in Kauhava instead for a couple of years, be crowing. So once I got back to Rovaniemi, it started immediately within months' time, 78.
What were your first thoughts of the aircraft?
Awesome. A lot of noise and a lot of metal.
So what was the role of the Draken in Finland at this time?
It was vital, you could say, because it was first Western-built real fighter aircraft with capabilities in the radar and missile as well. As you will probably hear, the MiG-21 is somebody's personal favorite, but we always thought that you may do parallel rolls and loops with a fighter and escape with 2 Mach. But if you want to fight, this is the one to be flying with.
So what were the main threats at this time to Finland?
Well, you could say that the Cold War period was very active at a time. I can tell you one typical thing is that I used to be 6 years as a radar fighter leader as well. So the interest on the eastern side border was much more vivid than to the western side. As the Swedes like to say that the border is there for knowing on which side you're going to pay the taxes. Nothing else. So we actually had few occasions with the Draken that came into history, one of which was a missile that got lost from the Russian side and entered Finnish airspace. And I was active at a time as a fighter controller, and I can tell you that we acted the one. And there's a story that Finnish didn't notice anything about it, but you can actually tell that there was a Draken up in the air with appalling weather. Wow. There's always a chance that the pilot has to eject the interceptor as there are no suitable places to land. But luckily we got one airport open.
That's good.
With the weather enough, so we were there.
So could you talk us through your ground training on the Draken?
Okay, there was something like 4 weeks worth of basic theory training in the classroom. Then you had the simulator session taking something like 2 weeks further, and then the Caesar or double-seater Draken was the next step. And if I recall it correctly, we had something like 10 flights or 10 hours of flying with the Caesar. And then this Pertil B version was the first single-seater we stepped into.
Can you talk us through your first trip in the Draken?
Well, you have to admit it was exciting. And the very first flight was on the back seat of the trainer, and the next flight straight in the front. And once the electric canopy is closed, you feel quite excited.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And the Caesar is so light that the afterburner takeoff was something to remember by.
So you could feel the power difference coming from the
Yeah.
Hawk.
You can actually do that.
So what kind of training would you conduct?
All the basic things: flying, low speed handling qualities, high speed flying, aerobatic maneuvers, instrument flying, formation flying with 2 to 4 ships, and basic air paddle maneuvers were trained with that, because it's very keen of stalling you. If you enter too high angle of attack, you have bought it this way. So
Yeah. So where were you based?
Rovaniemi, Lapland, Arctic Circle,
And what squadron was that?
Fighter Squadron 11.
So what kind of weapons would the Draken carry at this time?
We had Falcon missiles, IR, and radar-guided missiles, and rockets, and of course the Aiden cannon, 30mm cannon.
Did you ever practice live firing?
Yeah.
Can you tell us
With the
any stories
cannon,
about this?
I'm a non-commissioned officer, so I had no chance to fly a real missile, being a Mercedes worth in price. So I stood in the Volkswagen class with the cannon and rockets. But then again, every year we had this air cannery with the gun on, and ground attack with rockets and cannon.
So how did the Draken actually handle?
But it's very stable, and the thing is that as you have this aileron control, controlling both the aileron direction or roll direction, as well as the nose up, nose down. If you enter too high speed nose down, you get this servo stall, which means that you cannot pull more than 2 Gs. So we have to be very cautious. Low altitude, high speed, you will get bored by the farm, so to speak. So you have to be very cautious with high speed and low altitude.
So being a delta wing, was it difficult to land?
Well, the thing is that you have the center of lift so further front that you have something like 10 degrees nose up throughout the landing phase. The curvature in the thrust needed and thrust available is such that you have to have something like 90% thrust to push you through the landing. And if you go over speed, 20 kilometers per hour, it's accelerating quite heavily. But if you go under that peak, you have to use almost 100% to gain the required speed. Constant adjusting with the throttle, and as you don't see too much out of it, you have to be stable very early on.
So what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the Draken were?
Well, the strength is definitely the physical strength of the plane. You can fly so high speeds down in the turf that I think that no other plane at a time was capable of almost 1,400 kilometers per hour max speed. And of course, being a plane from the 50s, the weapon system wasn't at the late years up to date as we now have. But then again, it bites you if you are not cautious with the speed, because the number one instrument you had was alpha indicator. So if you go past 15 units of alpha, it's pretty stable. It doesn't warn anything, and it goes out of your hand in 22. So if you're turning tight, don't pay attention to the alpha, you're in a super stall, and that's a roller coaster, I can tell you.
So we have to talk about DACT. How did it fare against the types of the time?
I think that's pretty well indeed, because it was an interceptor by all means, with the radar and forward shooting weaponry, and with the thrust to weight ratio, it fought well against the others.
Did you ever go up against a MiG-21?
Yeah.
How did you fare in that?
Well, it turns tightly. I've flown from the backseat of a MiG-21 as well, so I disliked it because it's an Eastern way of designing cockpits. It's very claustrophobic. You have instruments here and there. Even you can think about an instrument, whatever oil pressure, oil temperature, whatever, as it's meant to be in a 12 o'clock position, the normal range. But as it's usually in a 2 or 3 o'clock, the instrument has been turned sideways. So it looks strange because the lettering is still like in the original, but the reading is 12 o'clock. That's the kind of approach they had. So.
Yeah. So did you ever take part in any large exercises?
Yeah, quite often. And the most cherished ones were, of course, this alert station in Helsinki, Turku, wherever you were. And you had the real stuff, intercepting an Nimrod or Russian, whatever type, Swedish Caravel. And it was quite often we got these trips to Helsinki and in an alert, as well as escorting high-rank people from around the world, presidents. Valery Siska's tank with 4 Drakens.
Wow.
Awesome.
So how did other nations view the Draken?
I think very similarly. Very similarly. In Austria, they had the last ones. And they have different conditions altogether at the mountains. So you have to approach the system quite differently. We have flat areas, we can fly whatever we wish to. But there you have the mountains. And Danish had even more experience with the heavy Drakens. They were much heavier than ours. More or less fighter bombers than we had, just interceptors in Finland.
So do you have any memorable stories you can share with us?
Well, why not? There are a lot of those.
Yes.
I have to be reducing them. Well, thing is that we have had a sauna in Rovaniemi. I was alert pilot on Friday evening. Well, soon enough we're going to get home. Then you had this whistle be blown. Now you fly to south of Finland in the evening. Raining in Pori, which is southwest base. 2 kilometers of runaway. Heavy winds, you're tired. And Draken comes within price with the speed. You have slippery runaway. You have 12 tons of metal around you. It's gusty wind, you're tired, so we used every single bit of the runaway and kutung, kutung, kutung afterwards. And one bad thing about Draken was that you have a maximum afterburner, and you retard the thrust lever a bit back, you have the minimum afterburner. I was on the wingman, and going by my number 1, I reduced the thrust lever just to the minimum thrust. Extinguished the afterburner completely. What takes place is that the nozzle back there opens up. So if you try to figure out like a pressure down there and it's not stiff enough, it's in your pants. So what happens with the nozzle open? You reduce thrust. And there's the end of the runaway. You try to lit the afterburner, but takes 10 seconds to fill up the turbo pump to get it started again. What happens? You open up, and speed reduces, accelerates, reduces, and the end of runaway is pretty close. So I had something like 2 meters worth with the gear and the opposite fence. So yeah. The interception of the British Nimrod in Baltic Sea. We started out from Pori, flew way down the sea just to intercept the Nimrod. There were clever guys in behind the stick because they noticed that we have a short span wing, high angle of attack. They reduced the power quite a bit, long wing. So we bypassed them with the stalwart. And they said on our frequency, the air traffic control frequency, nice job, guys.
Brilliant.
Flew back, and there was an American RC-135 crossing our way from the Russian side. And there were 2 MiGs intercepting this US guy. So there were a lot of traffic in there.
So how many hours did you get on Draken, and did you enjoy it?
Around about 650. So that's not well, it's not much, but I enjoyed it completely. The last flight I ever had in the Air Force was the Draken flight, 45 minutes. The last approach, what can I do? This is the last flight. I will not stall the plane, I will not hit the ground. It has to be a nice landing. But this feeling after the landing is how can I put it, sadness in a way.
Yeah.
That's it.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Well, what you have in here is the shields for this day glow instruments only, so you can actually reduce the glitter in there. The airspeed indicator is typical for nowadays. Let's say in Avro 85 City Hopper I flew, it's a similar vertical speed indicator. Very easy to use. You climb with airspeed up to 850. As you get the Mach number increasing, you follow the Mach number. And the other way around, when you're descending, you use the Mach number. And when the speed is 850, you skip the Mach number. Instead of this, in the fighter type, you have the radar instruments. And you have the boot. You look into the radar because otherwise you don't see too much out of it. You fly it with a trim. They have the trim. You adjust the position of the control stick accordingly. So if you make a loop, it's very hard to just use the stick. You trim it through the loop. And the most vital instrument, of course, is angle of attack. Very vital indeed.
You also have a head-up display there. Was that a very
No, that's
basic head-up display?
just a sight, conventional sight for that. Because this is a practice fighter, so to speak. But all in all, this cockpit is very, very tiny. You have everything in here: engine controls and instruments. On the left-hand side, navigational things and weapon system to the right. There you have the nose wheel steering. Very easy for takeoff. You just left hand on the throttle, right hand on the wheel. As you get 300 kilometers per hour, you take the stick and rotate, go flying.
The best part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it seems like a pretty small cockpit. Was it comfortable?
It was actually one of the best ones because you only have something like 3 millimeters of felt underneath your lower part. But then again, this tilt backwards is nice.
And what kind of flight helmet would you be wearing?
Conventional with the oxygen mask. It differs slightly from Western and indeed Russian types because you don't have any cord in here to hold your helmet on. Mm-hmm. It's tight fit, so every pilot has a day's worth of adjusting the helmet so it fits like a glove. It really does.
So sitting back in here must feel like home.
Yeah. And further you have a clever thing. I don't suppose there are same kind of gizmos in modern helmets, but you have a bag in here filled with oxygen. If you get more G's, it's sort of pulling the helmet backwards, tightening the mask.
So Ari, can you tell us what happened after you left the Air Force?
Well, I was a bit uneasy not doing anything, so I applied for a company called Air Botnia, fly the Jetstream commercially, and I got a chance to join them, and we moved from Rovaniemi down to my hometown Turku, and initially joined this commercial airline business. Soon enough they got the Saab 340, which after I flew the Saab 2000, yet another Saab. Then I swapped into the RJ85-100 4-engine, where I retired once more.
So did you enjoy flying commercially after coming from fast jets?
It's not comparable in any way. You may have this lousy bread, coffee throughout the day, all the old magazines. Well, you have nice ladies in the back, so. But it really is boring.
Yes.
It really is. You get flight hours, of course. You meet people at the airports. You know the procedures. You fly a lot of instrument flying, which I dislike. I like to see. That's all about flying, to see out.
So was it difficult coming from the Air Force and learning how to fly an airliner?
I don't think so, because I was also an instructor with twin engine liaison planes like Piper Chieftain, Cessna 402 in the Air Force. So I had my training also in the civil side, so to speak.
So how long did you spend on the airlines?
13 years.
Let's moving on. So do you have any hobbies?
Aviation. For some reason, I like to draw a lot, logos and characters and things like that. But then again, I fly air shows with the Fuga. Been in that business from '88, when the first Fugas were sold to civil owners. And I trained most of the pilots at the time for the Fuga. And there was a couple of years leave of absence in a way from the air show business. I flew gliders in between, which I started out with. And now I'm back to Saab Sapphire. We have 4 of them. We fly formation, flying with the restored Sapphires, which you can actually see in here as well. So, and I'm back into the gliders again. I'm restoring my old polished glider from '62.
So did you enjoy flying on the airshow scene?
Absolutely, I really do, because you get to know the same guys all over the place, wandering around the northern countries, Sweden, Norway. You get to know pilots like Mikael Carlson, Sweden, comes to Finland every year to fly his Fokker triplane, or Fokker D7, or whatever he has, Blériot. And once you have a couple of beers, you get to know the stuff quite well.
I can imagine, yeah. So how do you go about putting an airshow display together?
I think it started out as we have 2 Fugas, and the guy who flies it with me as the leader doesn't have any military background in Air Force at all, so he was so good with his handwriting in flying the Fuga that I suggested, why don't we try something nice with the pair of us? I can be the wingman because I had the experience of flying on the wing. So we have practiced something like 5 to 6 times only at the moment, so we're already quite tight with the Fuga.
Must be very enjoyable, I have to say.
It is, and luckily we have the Fuga is owned. The one I fly is a Helsinki businessman, very keen on keeping up the airworthiness. He has a huge spare parts assembly at his home. And the thing is that things like tires, or wheels, tires rather, they're very hard to come by. You have to buy something like 70 from Dunlop, and 1,000 pounds each. So it's hugely expensive. Yeah.
So is there an aircraft you wish you could have flown?
Mosquito, definitely.
Wow.
The having of Mosquito, my all-time favorite.
Not a fast jet?
Not exactly. They're making noises. Messerschmitt and of course the Mosquito.
Okay. So what's the favourite aircraft you've flown in your career?
I must admit it's the Hawk.
The Hawk.
Pretty much, yes.
So finally, do you ever get sick of talking about aviation?
Niente. There's a joke that let's quick talk about airplanes. Let's talk about me instead. So.
Yeah, I think all the aircraft.
Yeah.
Well, Ari, thanks very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure.